Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. A warm welcome to everyone this afternoon. Thank you for joining for our apartmentology webinar. We are joined this afternoon by several industry experts and thought leaders from NMHC, Lincoln Property Company, CoStar, as well as Grace Hill. And today we are going to cover the data and the details, an inside look at what renters like, love, and can't live without. And during this session, we're going to be unpacking several data trends and themes from the 2022 NMHC Grace Hill Renter Preferences Survey Report. We're going to be covering everything from resident demographics and psychographics to apartment search and touring preferences, lease decision factors, and more. So thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to our host, Katie Jeffers.
Thank you, Helena. So I'm Katie Jeffers with Grace Hill. I'm a survey team manager here, and I'm really excited and thrilled to be joined by this esteemed group of panelists who will be discussing the numerous results from the NMHC Grace Hill Renter Preferences Survey. So I've introduced myself. I'll let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves, starting with Sarah. Please go ahead.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. I'm Sarah Yaussi. I'm NMHC's Vice President of Business Strategy, and I have been very involved in the NMHC Grace Hill Renter Preferences Survey for almost a decade now, and serving as the team lead here today. Thanks for the invite.
I'm Margette Hepfner. Oh, sorry. I'm Margette Hepfner. I'm the COO of Residential Management for Lincoln Property Company. And I have to say that this particular survey has been one of my favorites for many, many years. So thanks for having me.
Hey, good afternoon, guys. I am Jagan Arumugam. I lead the analytics and data science team for apartments.com. And as Margette said, we also definitely look to this survey for a lot of insights around the industry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So before we dive into our panelist discussion today, we do want to just share some details about what this study is all about. So I'll let Sarah go into detail there.
Sure, thanks. Do you want to advance this slide? Sure. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the survey, this is a massive research project that NMHC and Grace Hill undertake every 2 years. The survey provides a very comprehensive look at the home features, community amenities that renters can't live without, and it also details how much they say they would possibly be willing to pay for them, and of course what matters during their home search, and ultimately what influences their leasing decisions. So because we've been doing this regularly for many years now, we're the only survey for our industry that has trending data over time. And more, I think for this conversation, it really is important because we have snapshots of what renters were thinking and feeling pre-pandemic and of course now post-pandemic. So this survey, if you could advance the slide, thanks. For the 2022 survey report, we received responses from more than 221,000 renters at more than 4,500 rental communities across the nation. And I'll say that these are professionally managed communities, which is a key distinguishing point for sure. I also say rental communities this year for the first time because rather than just apartment communities in our data set, we do have for the first time some single family rentals in our mix. It's not a huge amount, but I mention it because it is reflective of the changing rental landscape for sure. Given the deepness of this data set, we're able to cut the national data by metro areas, and we have coverage for about 79 individual metro levels. I'll detail that a little bit more later. These metro level reports can be purchased on an individual basis, and also the whole lot of them is included with the purchase of the national report package. So one of the big questions we always get is, how do we get all this data? And the answer is we work very closely with our wonderful member companies, and you see all of them here, to distribute this survey via email to their residents all across the country. This year, our survey went out in September 2021, which is a little later than we typically have done in the past. But we also look at it as a pretty good timing because when you think back, the Delta variant was subsiding and Omicron hadn't yet surged. So things were feeling relatively stable. And, we kind of liked that people were feeling very optimistic at that point. So as I mentioned earlier, if we could advance the slide, this is a really comprehensive survey. It truly follows the customer or resident journey, asking lots of questions about who the respondents are, what mattered during their search, their touring preferences, and what ultimately affected their leasing decisions. It also digs into the unit features, community amenities that matter most, and how residents might expect to pay for, how much residents might expect to pay for these things, and even what they intend to do when their lease expires. This map, if we can advance the slide again, shows you all those areas for which we have individual metro level reports available. Those are those blue pins, and then as for anyone interested in kind of looking a little bit deeper into the report, but not sure what might be in it, we also have a free lookbook available online at nmhc.org/residents. And that'll give you a pretty high level view of some of the big data trends that we've identified, and also some real life examples of how different firms are adapting their properties to these trends. And those are those orange pins.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah just described, the report and the survey itself obviously has a wealth of information. And we could have an all-day session just talking about all the data and the trends that are coming out of that report. But we don't have that much time, so we did want to pick just the 10 topics and most interesting themes coming out of this year's report, and then have a discussion about those. So we're starting with one of the themes that Sarah just mentioned. For the first time, there was some single-family home communities included in the report, and we're seeing growing interest in other home types aside from just your traditional multifamily apartment home community. So a question for the group here is this growing interest in larger home types like townhomes and single-family homes something that is just kind of a result of the pandemic, or is this a longer trend?
I think it's a combination of the two. So kind of thinking about the vast majority of renters today are actually renting homes. So the fact that professional apartment managers, owners are looking at either developing single family rental neighborhoods, it's not surprising. But I will say, we've been talking as an industry for years that we are at a housing shortage. We need housing. And then driven by the pandemic, so a couple of just great anecdotes. We work closely with a home builder that's in Texas that's has a national footprint. And pre-pandemic, their average home price was in right about $300,000. So entry-level homes up to more expensive homes. And to build exactly the same homes today, their sales prices are just over $600,000. So that's double. And they're not building, it's not a nicer home. They're not doing anything differently. Their profit margin isn't larger. It's just the cost of goods, supplies, the labor, and all of the things that we're all experiencing. So it really is a combination of the two. We need more housing. And in order to get that housing, the supply of new homes that a lot of renters would be transitioning into is just not there. So they're looking to make that next step, whether individually or as a family, and they have a lot of interest in being in a single family home. And we, thank goodness, have the ability to provide that to them just in a little bit different way than maybe they were looking to find it 3 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with Margette. That single family rental tranche of the market has been largely ignored for a really long time. And it's pretty massive. I mean, I think there's 14 million single family rental households. So it's a pretty big big chunk of the rental market. But it's been really highly fractionalized and not professionalized at all. You know, as Margette mentioned, a lot of those very high volume home builders, they've up until, you know, pretty recently, they've been focused on the just for sale, but there are people, those households have specific needs. And if they can't afford to buy a home or don't want to buy a home, they still have needs that apartments necessarily can't fit. You know, if they have a larger household, if they have a lot of stuff, if they have multiple pets and all these things that, you know, don't always fit very neatly into a, you know, one bedroom with a den. But, you know, just to share to kind of build on what Margette was saying about the growth in that segment of the market. I talked with our research folks, and we were talking specifically about the build to rent, because there is such that huge need to develop more units. And they were sharing with me that from about 1974 to 2007, the build to rent fraction of that single family rental inventory was about 7% of all rental starts, but it's been growing ever since. And so the average now is about 11%, and that's from about 2008 to 2020. And, you know, as Margette mentioned, there's been just so much activity over the last year and a half that it'll be interesting to see where that share ends up, you know, a couple more years from now.
Good. I mean, even just looking at our search volume on our side, when we still see a strong preference for apartments, but post-pandemic, you know, the demand for single-family homes and townhomes increased, and it has continued to stay up.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts there. And with interest in, you know, larger homes, there may not always be that availability. So if you're managing a more traditional apartment, you know, what does that look like in terms of increasing space or making the current space more flexible for renters? A really interesting finding from the survey this year was a big increase in interest in a very specific feature, modular closet system. So that's increased by 36% since the previous study. So is there any particular type of renter that's most interested in this feature?
So there's, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Sarah. There's not necessarily a particular type of renter. You know, I think that the pandemic, again, much of this could potentially be a result of the pandemic, but we all need to use our space better. And because we were stuck in our homes, lots of us stuck in our homes for an extended period of time, and trying to figure out how to balance the work and the home, and how to turn off work and turn on home, and turn on home and turn off work, vice versa, right? Just figuring out what that space looks like and where to keep our things. In addition to that, just being smart, it's a very European thing, right? So thinking about rethinking your space, the modular closet systems, just having a place for everything. And if we're staying in our apartments longer, or renting apartments longer because we can't find a home, average apartment sizes, or, you know, square footage is around 800 square feet. It's not a lot of space as you continue to grow older and you have more things. So finding a way to organize your things, especially over the last 2 years, as we've been stuck inside our four walls, kind of looking at all of our things, and don't want to get rid of them, but we need to figure out how to store them and how to organize them. And then the flex space inside and outside of the unit. So really thinking smart about what our renters are looking for and how best to lay out their space, and helping them lay out their space.
Yeah, I agree with Margette that people are definitely rethinking their space as they've experienced, as their experience through the pandemic has kind of helped shape that. You know, that issue of space, I think, is really important, because the research from the resident preferences survey report shows that when people just say that they don't intend to renew, there's really the top two reasons. And one is like they're seeking better price. The second is they're seeking more space. So if we can make their space more functional and usable, and then we have a chance at maybe having them stay in their unit a little bit longer, whether it's a year or whatever it is. It's still, you know, it's a turnover that we don't have to deal with. And so, you know, it's not surprising closets have anything related to closet and storage organization is always ranks pretty high on the survey. I mean, 88% are interested in walk-in closet. Well, yeah. And the same thing, like more storage space, 78%. And as Katie mentioned, like the big increase in interest in better modular storage is huge. And I think this storage thing definitely is really tied to that interest in flex space. When you asked about who is really most interested in this, and the survey results show that anybody who works from home is more interested in flex space. And that's not surprising, as Margette said, because, you know, they're turning closets into workspaces, and they, you know, need to figure out how to transition a limited square footage into different distinct areas where they can, you know, work and have the quiet that they need to do that, or, you know, also be able to entertain people or cook or do whatever that they want to do in their home. So, you know, I do think that's a really big transition, is that this work from home is really, you know, underscore the importance of flex space within the unit, for sure. And yeah, Margette, I agree with you too on outside of the unit too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, speaking of outside of the unit, you know, the flex space or flex idea comes into play in a whole nother format. So they're inside the unit, outside the unit, and then working from home brings in a whole nother element of flexibility, which is the ability to work really from anywhere. So another interesting, you know, outcome of the results this year is interest in some type of membership program that would model some type of vacation club membership where you could work from any apartment community within, you know, the wider company's range. So again, here, like, thoughts on this idea. Is this something that's temporary, or is this could this be a permanent trend?
Sarah, I think it would be great to hear a little bit more context on just feedback and NMHC's thoughts as you saw this feedback in the survey and kind of dug into it a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe it might be helpful also to just sort of anchor this in sort of what we found in the data first. So, you know, obviously through the pandemic, the shift to remote work was a big thing that we were tracking. And interestingly enough, 60% of those who in our survey said that they had moved during the pandemic. And we went one step further and said, well, did you move because of a shift to remote work? And a quarter of those people who did move during the pandemic said that shift to telecommuting was able to sort of free them up to be able to move somewhere else, whether that was city to suburb, city to city, city to rural, wherever it was. But we started really looking at these folks that moved as a shift to remote work. And we found that they were interested in a lot more different things. For example, these folks who moved during the pandemic for that shift to remote work were also much more interested in short-term rentals, or the ability to list their units on STR platforms like VRBO or Airbnb. And for the first kind of time, that was really regardless of age. What we had seen in prior years' research was that the interest in the ability to list their units on STR platforms really varied by age. The younger residents were much more open to that idea, and the 55 and olders were really anti. In fact, they said it would really affect their leasing decisions. So that shift to telecommuting and moving, like that combination really shifted the interest in STRs. And so when you kind of look at that ability to kind of move around at more infrequent or irregular, if you will, intervals, not having to do it on a year-long commitment, that sort of plays into this idea of this membership model. And, you know, this is a test question. We put some of these in there because we're testing concepts, and we know that we've heard from members who are kind of playing around with this idea of sort of a brand loyalty program where residents could potentially like sign on with a company and be able to spend different amounts of times at different properties within that that company's network, different places. So, we asked that, and we found for all respondents, it was about 46% were interested in and potentially interested in this model, which we kind of likened to a vacation model, vacation home model. But for that group that moved because of a shift to telework, it went up to 56%. And so we just kind of were noticing that, like, whatever happened during the pandemic, that people kind of said, well, I want to be where I want to be, and I can do my work from anywhere. That's a real like lifestyle choice now. And so we were kind of curious to talk a little bit more about it. And Margette, to your question, what we've heard is, there are lots of people who are like, that's really difficult to execute. It obviously has to have a big scale. But we also heard, yeah, we're thinking about this and we're kind of trying to figure out how it could work. We don't know what the parameters are. And then I've heard from other people like, hey, this is a really, really interesting concept. Some of these, like the kind of the next generation of STRs, like say, for example, like a landing, they're kind of moving in this direction. So it is something that people are talking about, even if it's not, out there in the market as a kind of standard option right now. So I think for us, we looked at it as an opportunity to think about what's that next step of innovation of rental living, and testing the waters on it, and we'll see where people go with it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I think that it absolutely warrants finding out more information, right? So is it a replacement of? So if you join the rental housing membership, does that mean that you're willing to put your home that you live in kind of that rental pool, and then you want to be able to kind of move around? Or is it a little different from that? You're going to keep your home just like you would vacation, right? And that you like to be in, I don't know, Chicago for a couple months in the summer, and you're guaranteed to always have a unit there in Chicago when you want it. So I think there's just so much from this, so many questions to continue to ask. And then yes, let's figure it out. So is this, are we furnishing the units ourselves as the owner operator? And is that what the renters are looking for? So they're looking to kind of come in and move into a space that's totally furnished and be there for a few months and then on to the next. Just so expectations around it too. And it would be very interesting to see from a demand perspective, not to put you on the spot, Jagan, but from a demand perspective, if that's anything that you guys are seeing at apartments.com in your data.
And we do see some interest in short-term rentals, but I don't think it's any. It's not too much. So, yeah.
So I do want to go back just to the other idea. I realized I kind of skipped over it, which is actually using the space in a more flexible manner. And I think, Margette, you had some thoughts around this too.
So yeah, using the kind of flexible space. So a number of different things is even prior to entering the pandemic, so before we knew this was coming, if you look at new developments, you were seeing desk space or workspace going back into some of our new units. You've seen what we've now started calling urban mudrooms, right? So we started seeing those a little bit prior to the pandemic as well. So continuing to make sure that and this goes back to the modular closets as well, just making sure that every bit of the space within the four walls of your renter's home is absolutely usable for something. It has a function. But then even taking it outside of the renter's four walls. So going into your club rooms, and what the pandemic truly taught us is that, you know, we built these great club rooms. We talked about making them like Starbucks like atmospheres, right? So communal tables and communal space where people would come and work right next to each other, but not really together. And clearly during the pandemic, we didn't want to be that close to people that we didn't know. And there were a lot of people that we did know that we did not want to be that close to. So having the ability to adjust space as necessary so that our communities have a longer lifespan without having to completely renovate space. So thinking about standing, so for example, like so many of us have adjusted to standing desks. So it's kind of the same thing, looking at your club room, your fitness centers, outdoor space, other indoor space, and making it flexible and transitional over time. Whether that's over time, it could be one thing on Sunday and something else on Monday, or over time, just kind of looking towards the future.
Thanks for sharing and giving that full insight into really all the different ways space can be used in a flexible way. This next topic here is something that's been on the radar for a while. There's always interest in smart home technology. So the question is, how has interest in smart home technology changed over the years? And is this something that can be as useful for operators as it is for residents themselves?
I can go first. You know, so renter interest remains steady for smart home tech, especially devices and technologies that can save them money. So we see, you know, the highest level of interest in things like smart thermostats, where 70% of respondents said they would consider or wouldn't rent without it. But that landscape is definitely changing as more products come online. But a lot of that adoption is being driven by the owners and the operators, right, who are looking to have that infrastructure for the IoT infrastructure to be able to kind of more efficiently manage their buildings in general, or communities in general. And so, you know, you see a lot more in the smart home tech packages. You know, there's now leak detection. You know, we didn't include leak detection 2 times ago, you know, so things keep changing. Similarly around security and those types of things, but there's still hurdles in all those integrations. And I'm sure Margette can speak to some of the challenges around you know, the smart locks and all that controlled access, those controlled access systems. So I think it's one of those things where it's maybe we thought in the beginning when these technologies came out that it was going to be consumer driven, but it seems to me that a lot of and while the consumers are getting some of those benefits, the real benefits are to the building operators and owners to be able to, you know, more proactively manage their communities and to be able to have a tighter control on expenses.
Sarah, you're absolutely right. So kind of thinking about it from a consumer perspective, we don't necessarily gain new leases because we have a smart thermostat in a unit. And on that same token, we don't necessarily lose a lease because we don't have that smart thermostat in a unit. However, that type of technology, some of those things renters are beginning to kind of expect in certain places. Again, not quite walking out the door and not signing a lease because they can't open their door with their phone, that they can't control the sound in their unit from their phone and those types of things. So that goes into one of Sarah's next points about the integration of all of that technology, and then personal preferences. You could poll the 6 of us here, and are we okay with having some sort of smart home system in our home? And I would bet that all 6 of us are not okay with it. And And then those of us who are, do we want Alexa? Do we want iHome? Do we want Google? Do we want something different? So there are personal preferences for different reasons. And it kind of goes on from there, right? And then getting a single app. You don't want your residents to have to go to 2 different apps, much less 16 different apps to access different things, whether knowing about packages or maintenance requests, thermostats, lights, and the list goes on, right? So we really took a step back and have started looking at it from, again, to Sarah's point, the overall health of the building. So that helps us in a number of different ways. When we're looking at investing in smart technology, smart building technology, we're looking at it from a valuation perspective and the overall health of the building. You really be able to equate an ROI to it better than trying to attach dollars to increases in leases. And then, so overall health of the building, think about smart thermostats. In some place where it's 100+ degrees in the summertime and places where it's below freezing on a regular basis, for the maintenance supervisor or the property manager to be able to have a dashboard and look at not just vacant units, but also occupied units where the renter may not be there. And they're able to monitor and prevent things that could happen, damage from too much heat, damage from frozen pipes that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. So smart thermostat, same thing with the leak detections, the leak detection inside units and then in common areas as well, and also controlled access. So just giving us a better understanding of what's happening in our building, when it's happening, how to control it, how to control utilities, when the fitness center is used, when it's not used, to really make better, smarter decisions about the overall health of the building.
And from a consumer demand perspective, when we do see renters searching for smart home technology and asking, well, when they're submitting email leads, they ask if they can use their own Google Nest thermostat. But but the volume is still pretty low. And I think to Margette's point, I don't think anyone is walking out because you don't have the smart technology. And I said the volume isn't, it hasn't reached a critical volume yet. That's my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jagan. Thank you. The smart home, if you think about it, is kind of an advanced feature of resident experience. And really some of the most critical things to residents are still the basics. So what the survey results found this year is that 89% of survey respondents indicated that reliable cell service is one of the most important things when making their decision about leasing, as well as just having high-speed internet. So both of those kind of infrastructure pieces are really necessary to do anything beyond that, like having the smart thermostat in your home. So question for the group, since these are such kind of basic parts of the resident living experience, how do owners and operators impact connectivity in the community?
Depends on the asset and what our ability is to do that. But on reliable cell phone service, that's something that as an owner operator, we need to be cognizant of, whether that's inside the unit, inside kind of common areas, parking garages, really having the ability for me to be able to make a phone call regardless of where I am. So thinking about it from a safety and security perspective as an individual, and being by myself in a dark parking garage, or even in the fitness center if I'm working out by myself at odd hours, right? It's just a little bit of a perhaps false sense of security, but a little bit of a sense of security for the resident themselves. But then, gosh, the pandemic, we were all in our homes and we needed internet, and we needed, very few people have landlines anymore. So we were really relying on the connectivity in the air. So that is extremely important. It's one of the things you see, I think this is actually in the survey, Sarah, but you see residents checking their self-service while they're touring a building, and that they don't have reliable cell service, and that can be a deal breaker.
Yeah, I was going to throw that in there. I mean, there's no doubt that connectivity is king for renters, and it's fully in the sights for property owners and managers. It is, as we said, it's the fourth most popular, high-speed internet is the fourth most popular unit feature after washer, dryer, AC, and soundproof walls. It's critical. And to your point about having that curb to couch connectivity, I mean, that's just not for what's in their unit. They do really want to get out of their car and wherever they are, be in the elevator and make it all there without dropping. And just because you mentioned it, Margette, it's about 45% of our survey respondents that said that they checked cell phone connectivity during the tour. So it's something that is, is top of mind and can absolutely influence leasing decisions. And so I think there's been a lot of effort being put into this from the kind of operator perspective to try and achieve that. There are lots of hurdles, which I'm sure Margette can tell you more. I mean, everything from just what the building's made of to just these different spots where it's, the technology doesn't quite reach as far or has difficulty penetrating. And, hopefully we'll get to a point where we can have that sort of seamless connectivity, because there's no doubt that there's even more and more resident reliance on connectivity and just for their own activities. I mean, I'm shocked. We asked people what they were doing on the internet, and a third of respondents said that they are gaming daily. That's a lot. And that's a lot of bandwidth. And that's, that's a big load on the infrastructure. And so I think this is a priority area for operators for sure. And it's not an easy one to navigate between all the different challenges.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
That's why I just, as you said, in the post-pandemic, we definitely see an increase in the number of renters inquiring about having a reliable internet connection because, as you know, all of them are working from home, so they do need a reliable connection. Yeah.
I actually had a quick question for you. One of the kind of interesting things that are kind of evolving in the space right now is this idea of these connectivity certifications, like a Wired score, a Rover score, which kind of gives some transparency into the connectivity of a community. Are you seeing anybody searching from this? It's a really new concept, and it hasn't been, how much consumers are really familiar with this, like they are with like a LEED certification or a healthy building certification is, clearly not there yet. But I'm just curious if you are seeing any search activity that might be along those lines.
No, I mean we have, we do see renters searching for cable internet keyword searches on our site, but not specifically that score. No, we haven't seen that.
Talking about kind of what's essential and how do you work around the nuances of challenges with different assets and different situations, I think package delivery falls into that bucket. And this has been a hot topic many years before the pandemic came around. But certainly with the pandemic, there was an increase in the number of packages being delivered and the types of things that were being delivered, more perishable items being delivered. So again, question for the group. How do operators respond to this increased delivery, especially of perishable items and food deliveries and oversized items?
This one's hard. I think most properties do not have the capacity, the space anywhere to truly manage and maintain 100% of the packages, perishable, non-perishable, tires, mattresses, couches, things like that are actually delivered in a box, right, to the property. So it's honestly a combination of things. So one, making sure, kind of defining what space you do have. In a lot of places, we don't just have lockers. We have lockers plus storage rooms, and really those storage rooms have been during the pandemic have been really great for us. So managed ones that have the cameras inside and outside, so that we're taking our teams away from having to deal with those packages. And then on the perishables, look, a lot of this we have to have conversations with our residents and setting expectations. And if we're going to accept their packages, accept perishables, just let them know what we can. We've got a certain amount of space. Maybe we don't have the space for refrigerated storage, and we just don't. So maybe the residents need to be home and those things need to be delivered directly to their unit, to their doors. Shifting to, so there are a couple of services out there, one of them that started in Texas a number of years ago, and they seem to be expanding, but they'll actually accept packages for the resident. So really looking for services like that can help with the package delivery. And then again, setting expectations and having communications with the residents. We have not gone so far as to not accept packages anywhere. However, we have to set the right expectations with our residents to let them know that we're not responsible for those packages. On some of the higher end, high touch luxury communities, we have taken it a step further kind of as an industry, and kind of concierge package delivery delivered into their homes, but that's not a norm, and that's not something that we can expect to do across the industry.
Yeah, Katie, I think in our prep call you had mentioned, you had kind of asked, was there anything surprising that we found in data? And there was much we found that was unsurprising, like a shift to higher volumes of packaging and a big decrease in people who had never ordered perishables before. But two things that kind of jump out to me, and to piggyback a little bit on what Margette was just saying, is that there was a shift from the last time we did this in package delivery preferences. So self-service solutions like the package lockers and package rooms that Margette mentioned were still the most popular option, with 46% of respondents saying that they were interested or very interested in them. But we did see for alternatives, we saw an increase for packages being left at the door. So that was about 26% of respondents said that was an acceptable option the last time we did this, when the report came out in 2020. And that went up to 37% this time around. Conversely, the packages being delivered inside the unit, that was around 12% in 2020, and that fell to 9% in 2022. When we think about that, I think that's really a pandemic shift because people maybe are home more now. So there's less risk of that theft if they know that their package is right outside their door and they're home. That whole curbside drop off, or that concept is, I feel like we can see it in the data a little bit, that has kind of shifted people's expectations. Now, what happens when and if people do go back to work like before, which I personally don't think it'll be exactly like before. That may change it again the next time we do this, but that was a surprising shift. The other thing that I'm probably the only one who gets really excited about trash, but we did ask some questions this time about whether this package volume was creating any stresses on trash collection. And 1 out of 5 respondents said that yes, the packages were creating trash issues. And younger and higher income renters were more likely to report issues. And the issues they reported was like not enough collection, messy, those types of things. So, it's something to think about, I think, going forward, especially in like new developments where there's opportunities to be a little bit more intentional.
Yeah. Jagan, is there anything interesting from your data related to resident behavior and packages?
Again, post-pandemic, I think we saw an increase in the number of people asking for package lockers and package delivery. But I think, yeah.
Yeah. So it's probably a trend that's here to stay. And Sarah, you're talking about how there's inconveniences created by pet deliveries with trash and so forth. I think another topic that's also a benefit but can be potentially problematic is allowing pets on site. And a third of residents indicate that they do live with some kind of pet or service animal, so substantial portion of the resident base here. So I guess what are some of the most important takeaways to know about residents and pet ownership?
I mean, pets are part of our residents' family, right? I don't know how many of I have a dog. I've always had dogs. They're, part of the family. Setting expectations with residents. So in our community rules, all of our communities, we set those expectations with the residents, and just making sure that they're responsible pet owners and I think that all of our communities are pet friendly. I mean, that's a standard. There could be an owner somewhere that maybe is not, but just setting those expectations, doing the things that we need to do, providing, especially for all of the dogs, making sure that we have treats, which is kind of fun, but also waste bags and places for them to dispose of those things and all of that kind of stuff. And on the same token, also helping and reminding our residents to be respectful of their neighbors who may not have pets and may not love pets. But it's just, pets are one of our residents as well. So making sure we're catering to them.
I can verify point number 2. Renter's best friend is, dog, because we see twice as searches for dogs than cats. So definitely dogs are preferred. But I think a question for Margette, we do see an increased number of renters searching for pet playgrounds, like pet play parks. I don't know if there's any properties trying to create some pet play areas.
I would say that is in any new development, whether it's in the city, high rise, or suburban, having a pet area and an off-leash pet area, so that, an off-leash area, right? So for 2 reasons. One, it would be really easy for all of your green space to just be turned into pet parks that your residents don't use, because it's just not, it's been lots of dogs, just lots of dogs kind of using that space. So having that defined area accomplishes 2 things. Let your green space be green space, park space for all of your residents, and then provides an area for your pet owners, for your dog owners to take their animals. And the same token, pet spas, places, dog washing, that serves a couple of purposes as well. Having clean, dogs can be kind of smelly, right? If you provide an area for our residents to bathe their dogs and all of those kind of supplies and accoutrements, and there are lots of spaces that you can do this in a building, or at a community. So yes, all those things. And then on the breed restrictions, so it'd be interesting. I don't know if you can search for no breed restrictions on apartments.com. I don't recall, but we do have a lot of communities that have started moving away from breed restrictions, and have moved away from weight limits.
So Margette, you just mentioned a number of kind of community-like features, like having a dog park or specific dog area. So that leads us kind of into the last 2 topics here, which are additional community features that are really valued by residents. And fitness centers have always been a popular amenity. 70% of respondents said they were interested or wouldn't rent at a community without one of these. So how has this community feature evolved over time, and can it be enhanced in any way?
Fitness centers are very interesting. We would never advocate for building a community without them. Sure, they're small, you don't always have them. 70% of respondents say they won't rent without it, and less than 40% actually use the fitness center. So that's always interesting to me. Similarly to pools in the southern states, people expect the pools to be there, and the percentage of people that actually use them is quite small. Having outdoor fitness space, being creative with your space. So there are a lot of ways to be, so having flexible area, bikes. So the picture of the bikes, I think, is perfect. Having bike kitchens, bike storage, bikes for the community that the residents can rent out or borrow so that they can utilize. And then I think one of the most important things, so I mentioned at the beginning, I think we all did, this is one of my favorite surveys that's done, but I think it's really important for all of us as owner operators not to just rely on this survey, the national survey, or even drilling down into the specific metro surveys, but we have a great audience in our renters. So making sure that we're asking them questions as well. So looking at an existing community, if we're planning to make changes to our space, to our fitness center, indoor, outdoor, asking our residents what they use and what they like, because racquetball courts, believe it or not, in some places are really used and in other places they're not. So making sure that we're asking our residents what they want, what they use, looking at our direct competitors and where we're losing leases and what those communities have that we don't have. It's probably one of the most important takeaways, particularly when it comes to fitness centers and amenities, because the things that residents demand across the country from metro to metro are just different.
That's a really good point. We went through this in developing the survey, and most of us met up in DC, and I was like, well, we should ask about pickleball. And they're like, what's that? Because in like Florida, it's really popular and it's growing by leaps and bounds there. And, you know, we have members who've been converting tennis courts to pickleball courts and things like that. So it is really regional. Similarly, we see different stuff in like Colorado, where there are more need for, like you will see need for storage space outside the unit where they might want to store their camping gear, their kayak or whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting and a really good point to make, that there are some pretty impressive regional differences too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a conundrum with those fitness centers.
It is.
Yeah, they expect them, but they really don't use them. And I looked at the responses for why that 40 to 50% say that they rarely or never use the fitness center, and 43% just say they're not interested. So I mean,
maybe that's why we are not seeing so many searches for fitness centers on our side.
Interesting.
Or maybe we do have that information displayed prominently on the detail page. I'm kidding, but yeah.
Well, in talking about fitness and fitness centers, you all mentioned a number of things related to just other amenities at the community that, increase activity and kind of a healthy living. And there was, so you just mentioned some really specific amenities that are very specific to particular geographies. Is there anything else interesting or important people should know about some of those regional differences in these amenities, especially outdoor amenities?
So for having any kind of outdoor space for a renter is really important. So anywhere that we can, even if it is truly just like the Juliet balconies, or the ability to open windows so that you can get some fresh air, is so very important, especially when you have tiny space. So you thinking about some of the, not even micro units, but efficiencies in smaller apartments. If you have the ability to open a door and even have a tiny little balcony or a tiny little patio, it changes the look and feel of the four walls that you have. So anywhere that we can, we really encourage that. And there's that stat on the community pool. 73% want a pool. And it is less than 40% that truly do actually use the pool in most communities. You have a lot of properties where, depending upon the demographic, 100% of the residents are in the pool every single weekend. But for the most part, it's actually a smaller number. They just expect to see it.
Similarly, I think we see a lot of, if you look at geography, in the southern states, they're searching for pools. The northern states, you can see a lot of search for balconies, and but also we also see a demand for playgrounds in the southern states, significantly more than the others. And in Texas, they want yards, basically, apparently. So they look for yards. So.
So, there's a question that popped up, and is the outdoor space something that renters are willing to pay more for? I think the short answer is it depends, but I think the most important thing as an operator is that we teach our residents how to use space. So it's really, if we just have a big open green space in the middle of a community, like I mentioned, it could easily turn into a pet park. But if we teach our residents how to use it, so depending upon the demographics, if we set up cornhole on the weekends. We've had a number of communities where we've actually done cookouts and camping under the stars, right? Which sounds really silly, and why would we let our residents pitch a tent in the middle of the community? But when it's a little bit controlled and we teach them how to use that space, they eventually start to use it, and they see the community as their own community, and they really start to see the entire property as theirs and a little more of their home. They take ownership in it in a number of ways. If they're using it to camp out or play with their kids or do some things outdoor games with their friends and their fellow neighbors, they're more likely to take care of the space because they see it as their own space. They're also more likely to renew and stay on the property because, again, they're not just renewing the four walls inside of their home. They're really looking at the community itself as their home. And that's where we can see an increase in rent. Now, we do obviously charge more if someone has a yard, like kind of a fenced in yard that's their own. But we can accomplish a lot of that with the space in our communities if we just teach them how to use it.
Yeah, those are some great points. I know we're getting close to the end of the hour here, and I saw like one of the questions in the chat was about what percentage of these vary by geography, and I know that we have a lot of data in those reports that you were mentioning, Sarah, where people can look at all these results across those, I think it was 79 metro areas.
Yeah, 79.
Mm-hmm.
And so if
the very last item.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I would just to reiterate that those individual metro areas, you can purchase just that report for that area. If you are regional and need multiple metro areas, it might behoove you to look at the whole package because you'll get every single one of them.
Mm-hmm. And there was also a question about this. This is being recorded and it will be shared, I think, in the following days after today. There was quite a few more questions. I know we didn't get a chance to go through all of them. Margette, you answered one of the questions about what people willing to pay more for the pool. So we can try to go through the questions later and try to follow up with some answers. I'm just going to check to see. Last question that just came in right under the wire. Is there any interest in car charging stations? And that was in the report, something about electric vehicle charging stations.
Yeah, we do ask about electric vehicle ownership and interest in that type of charging. I don't. The interest right now is fairly low. It's like single digits, like low single digits nationally. However, when we look at it by different markets, you'll see the California markets have a higher uptake of some of that vehicle ownership, of EV ownership, and subsequently higher levels of interest. It is definitely something that is, I literally had 3 calls today about that today. It's top of mind, especially as the regulatory environment continues to change and that different jurisdictions impose either requirements or put in place incentives to encourage electric vehicle ownership. So yes, it's the report. We didn't have time for everything, but there are some stats in there on that.
It's definitely one of the top 10 searched keywords on our site. Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, we are at the end of time. I know, like I said earlier, we could probably spend the entire day talking about some of these results and talking about the interrelationship between the resident experience and how it relates to this. So we're at the end of the hour, and I know all of us often have another meeting to go to. So thank you very much for everyone attending today, both for our guests and for our panelists. This has been such a great discussion.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.